Hello my friends, and thank you for being a member. The fact that you value my opinion on investments is very humbling, very important to me, so I try my best to bring as much value as I can to the members. If you have any suggestions, I'm always open to them. Today I want to have a chat about this very interesting developer. Usually putting a value on developers is pretty difficult. It's somewhat different from established miners, where we have production going on, where we have established costs, and we can attempt to put some value on the reserves and resources in the ground. With developers, it's a bit more tricky, but in this case, the outstanding piece of information about this nickel developer is that they already have a large buyer for a part of their deposits, making these outside sourced valuations, as the potential buyer looks at the deposit, fascinating. The miner that I'm looking at is Magna Mining, and they are developing several projects in Ontario, Canada. Mostly those are nickel projects, but the deposits come together with copper as well as a range of metals in the platinum group. As I mentioned, the fascinating part to looking at Magna Mining is that at the beginning of the year they signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, and yes, granted, it's not a binding agreement. Nevertheless, it shows a glimpse at the valuation that one of the largest trading companies in Japan, Mitsui and Company, is putting at the deposit held by Magna, and specifically we're looking at the Shakespeare project, where Mitsui signed a memorandum of understanding of buying 10% to 12.5% of that Shakespeare project for $8 to $10 million. If you extrapolate that to 100% of the Shakespeare project, that means the Mitsui thinks the valuation of the Shakespeare is around $80 million. So that helps with this difficulty of putting a finger on the valuation for developers that don't have producing mines yet. But at the same time, reward comes with risk, and if the management is successful at de-risking the project in the longer term, perhaps over the next couple of years, these are the sort of plays that could be extremely lucrative. So if you look at Mitsui, it's a pretty big company with a revenue of nearly $100 billion per year and a market cap of nearly $46 billion. It's a trading company. They specialize in a range of commodities, and it would seem that they know what they're doing. According to their opinion, this Shakespeare project held by Magna should be valued at least $80 million. But you know, the cool thing, the juicy thing, is that Magna Mining has another 3 projects ongoing. There's Green Hill, there's Shining Tree, both with some estimation of the deposits underground, and there is a relatively new discovery, P4 discovery, where we don't have estimates of the resources yet. But in either case, let me dig deeper a little bit into each of these projects, starting with this painstaking map where I try to figure out where the projects are actually located based on some vague description on the company website. And I came up with this understanding of Google Map of Ontario, where we have 3 of the 4 projects, Shakespeare, Green Hill and P4 Discovery, relatively close to each other within 5 to 6 kilometer distance, and Shining Tree at a distance of around 160 kilometers to the northeast from these 3. And all of these 4 projects are somewhere around Sudbury in Ontario. One thing to notice here is that all of this area on the screen in front of you, all of this area of the map, is full of very potential projects held by such global players as Vale, for example, and lots of others. So there is a lot of potential for further discoveries in this area. Now, digging deeper into each of these projects, starting with Shakespeare. For now, the reserve estimation is as follows. We have some probable reserves as of early this year at around 12 million tons, containing a range of metals, mostly nickel. So if you convert all of these range of metals into, say, a nickel equivalent, the probable reserves add up to about 60,000 tons of nickel equivalent. In addition, Shakespeare has indicated and inferred resources, again, range of metals here, mostly nickel. If you convert to nickel equivalent, the indicated resources add up to about 112,000 tons of nickel, and that is exclusive resources, so that's in addition to the 60,000 tons of reserves. And for the inferred resources, the nickel equivalent adds up to about 13,000 tons of nickel. So in total, that's over 180,000 tons of nickel. And at the ongoing nickel price of over $30,000 per ton, that is a lot of value in the ground. At least $80 million worth of value, according to Mitsui. And looking at this upper chart, the price of nickel, looks like nickel bottomed out at the beginning of 2016. That's pretty close to where the previous gold bear finished, which was December 2015. Since then, nickel prices generally have an uptrend, a bit of a spike and drop this year, but higher prices into the future are quite likely, as global consumption is only growing at least since 2010. So the valuation of this Shakespeare project might actually improve over the years. And according to Magna Mining, the discussions with Mitsui are still ongoing. And as they move from a non-binding MOU to something more binding, that could also be one of the news-related drivers to the share price in the future. But again, as I mentioned, the fascinating thing here is that Magna Mining has a lot of other projects, including Green Hill, for example, where we have estimation of resources only without any information on reserves yet. Resources are slightly less certain than reserves. And according to my calculations, the total of these resources, including the resources that could be mined in open pit and underground, add up to about 500,000 tons of nickel equivalent. That's actually pretty close to the statement on the company's website, about £500 million in nickel itself. And once you add the value of associated metals, convert that to nickel equivalent, you get to about £1 billion, or something around 500,000 tons of nickel. So that's amazing. That's potentially bigger than Shakespeare project, which is just really salivating, to be honest. But there is more. There's Shining Tree, without any recent estimates of the reserves or resources. There is a historical estimate from 2006, so that's quite a while ago, adding up to around 17,000 tons of nickel equivalent. That's including indicated and inferred resources. And in addition to these three projects with some estimation of resources, there is a more recent discovery, the P4 discovery, without any estimation of reserves. There are a couple of holes over here that have up to 1.16% in nickel, which could potentially be substantial because all of the tables we've looked at so far go only up to around 0.5% in nickel. And that's about 1 kilometer away from the previous known resource of a relatively low content of nickel of about 0.25% of nickel equivalent. So there is a great potential that there is much more of these nickel resources somewhere in between these holes. And again, there is no risk-free investment. Everything is risky. Any sort of return comes with an associated level of risk. But in this case, I think the potential into the next 2 to 3 years is really wonderful. So moving on to the details we usually like to look at. According to Yahoo Finance, Magna Mining has around $2.3 million in cash right now, almost no long-term debts. Shakespeare project used to be a producing mine, which suggests there might not be too much capex going into the future, but of course we'll have to see. Green Hill also used to be a producing brownfield site. Again, hopefully not that much capex to develop that into the future. Again, we'll have to see. So as I mentioned, we often don't really have that much data to figure out some fundamental valuation for developers as opposed to producing miners, which makes these sort of valuations somewhat difficult. And Magna Mining is planning to build a processing plant near Shakespeare, that's near all of these three projects, with only the Shining Tree at about 160 kilometers distance. This processing plant will probably require a capex of 233 million, according to Magna Mining, but I'm sure it's going to add to the value of this developer. As for the costs of extracting nickel out of the ground, of purifying it, producing it, I couldn't really find any reliable modern sources, but according to this book over here, the costs range anywhere from around $6,000 to $10,000 per ton of nickel. And with the ongoing price of over $30,000, all of these projects still look pretty attractive. Even taking into account some perhaps dilution risk in the future. At the moment the number of shares outstanding is under 150 million, with warrants fully diluted shares are at about 190 million. And a relatively good sign here is that the management, the directors, are holding a relatively good position at a 14%, and it would be nice to see this higher, but 14% is not too bad. And lastly, the cherry on top, the punchline over here is that all of this could be had, you can get all of this for the total market cap of under $70 million for all of Magna as of a close yesterday on the 8th of December 2022. And remember the valuation of Shakespeare alone at around $80 million by one of the largest companies in Japan. And beyond Shakespeare, they have another 2 projects with a lot more resources in the ground and a new discovery hole with a lot of exploration potential. So all of this is fascinating to me at the moment, and I've mentioned Magna Mining for you guys in the middle of November. And since then, if you have a look at the model portfolio, I have already been accumulating several times. And just to remind you, while the details of my trades are still in the model portfolio, I'll not litter my posts with these details any longer. So again, let me finish with this cherry on top. Market cap of all Magna Mining is under 70 million right now, with Mitsui, one of the largest companies in Japan, putting a value of $80 million on the Shakespeare project alone, with Magna Mining holding a larger amount of resources elsewhere with a very promising further discovery success. So there you go. I'm sure this video helps to raise your interests in having a look at this. And for more interesting ideas, please share your views in the comments so we have something more lively going on which will benefit each one of us. Under any of the posts, you can add comments over here, and I'm sure a mutual exchange of interesting ideas is just going to make things that much more lucrative and beneficial to each of us. Thank you again for being a member. Have a nice Friday and a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.